Hertfordshire, England, a place known for its calm suburbs, quiet streets, and close-knit communities, was shattered by one of the most horrifying crimes in recent British history. Inside a quiet suburban home, 3 women, all from the same family, were brutally murdered in an attack so cold and merciless that it shocked the entire nation. The most chilling detail? The weapon used was not a gun or a knife, but a crossbow, a weapon of silence and deadly precision, more often associated with medieval history or sport than modern crime. Investigators would later describe the scene as something out of a nightmare, 3 lifeless bodies discovered within the very walls of the home where they should have felt safe. Neighbors recalled the moment police swarmed the street, flashing lights, sirens, and forensic teams entering the home, yet none of them had heard gunshots or cries for help, only a sudden eruption of chaos in an otherwise quiet night. One resident admitted in disbelief that the victims were kind people, and for something so violent to happen in their community was terrifying. Forensics officers carefully searched every room, collecting evidence and piecing together the brutality of what was now officially a triple homicide. Police described the killings as deliberate, targeted, and deeply disturbing, warning the public of the suspects' danger as fear began to spread across the UK. Outside the home, a wave of grief soon followed. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes appeared on the pavement, left by friends, neighbors, and strangers who could not understand how such cruelty could exist. 3 women, a mother and her 2 daughters, had their futures stolen in seconds, their family destroyed, and their community left in shock. And as the truth sank in, one haunting realization remained: the killer was still out there. Within hours of the triple crossbow murders, police were under immense pressure to find out who could be responsible for such unimaginable brutality. The shockwaves had barely begun to settle when Hertfordshire Constabulary announced the name that would dominate headlines across Britain: 26-year-old Kyle Clifford. Almost instantly, his identity transformed the investigation from a mystery into a targeted manhunt. Clifford was not just a random figure plucked from thin air. His name surfaced after investigators connected key evidence from the scene, including witness accounts and personal ties to the victims. Early reports revealed that Clifford had once served in the British Army, a detail that sent chills down the spine of the public. With a military background came training, discipline, and knowledge of weapons, making him not only dangerous but also resourceful. A man with this type of experience handling a crossbow was not acting blindly. He knew what he was doing, and investigators believed the attack was both deliberate and personal. This wasn't the act of a stranger or a chance encounter. Clifford had a link to the family, suggesting deep-rooted tension or unresolved conflict. Police officers were quick to underline the danger, holding a press conference where they described Clifford as armed, unstable, and highly dangerous, warning residents not to approach him under any circumstances. His photograph, a serious, stern-looking young man, was plastered across every major news outlet, turning him into the face of fear overnight. The media seized the story with relentless urgency. Newspapers branded him the crossbow killer, while television bulletins repeated his name on a loop, urging anyone with sightings or information to contact authorities immediately. Social media lit up with his image, spreading faster than any official police alert could manage, as people across the UK shared warnings and speculated on what could have driven him to commit such monstrous crimes. In Hertfordshire, residents double-locked their doors, anxious over the possibility of Clifford lurking nearby. Parents kept children indoors, and shopkeepers whispered nervously about the killings that had stained their quiet town with blood. The weight of Clifford's profile, young, ex-military, dangerous, gave the manhunt an even darker edge, because this was not a suspect who would be easy to corner. He knew survival tactics, he understood how to evade capture, and his choice of weapon hinted at someone who wanted to inflict maximum fear with minimal noise. Detectives now faced a grim challenge: to track down a man who had already proven he could kill swiftly, brutally, and without hesitation. Behind the scenes, criminal profilers began piecing together his mindset, warning that Clifford's background might make him unpredictable. The murders themselves suggested not only anger but planning, as using a crossbow required intent and preparation. Forensic teams at the crime scene worked tirelessly, trying to gather every possible detail linking Clifford to the attack, while officers across Hertfordshire and surrounding counties mobilized to trace his movements. Police helicopters scanned fields and woodland, patrol cars blocked key roads, and officers knocked on doors, asking residents if they had seen a tall young man moving through the area. The urgency was palpable. A triple killer was on the run, and his identity was no longer a secret. For the grieving family of the victims, the knowledge of who was suspected added both clarity and anguish. This was not an unknown monster, this was someone with a connection to them, someone who had been close enough to destroy their lives in the most savage way. For the wider public, the question now loomed larger than ever: where was Kyle Clifford, and how long before police could bring him into custody? The revelation of his name marked a turning point in the investigation, from tragedy and shock to fear and anticipation, because everyone knew the hunt for Clifford was now a race against time. The moment police identified Kyle Clifford as the prime suspect, the investigation escalated into one of the most urgent manhunts in recent UK history. Clifford was believed to be armed, highly dangerous, and capable of killing again without hesitation. Officers knew they had to act fast, not only to bring justice for the 3 women who had been murdered, but also to prevent further bloodshed. From Hertfordshire to North London and beyond, a massive police operation swung into action. Armed response units, search dogs, and helicopter patrols were dispatched, combing through fields, residential streets, and wooded areas where Clifford might be hiding. Roadblocks were set up on key routes, while transport police monitored trains and stations in case he attempted to slip away using public transit. This was no ordinary suspect. Clifford's military background made him a particularly challenging target. He was trained in survival, skilled in evasion, and capable of moving silently, the kind of suspect who could disappear into the shadows if given enough time. Detectives described him as a man who knew how to live off the grid, and that made every passing hour even more dangerous. Meanwhile, police flooded the media with urgent appeals, repeating one chilling warning: do not approach this man. News anchors emphasized that Clifford was still believed to be in possession of a crossbow, a weapon that could kill in seconds. His face, now instantly recognizable across Britain, glared from every TV screen, smartphone, and newspaper. The public was told to remain indoors if they spotted him, and to dial emergency services immediately. The fear in Hertfordshire and surrounding counties was palpable. Parents kept their children inside, pubs and shops locked up earlier than usual, and neighborhoods fell into an eerie silence, as if everyone was holding their breath. Clifford's photograph became a haunting reminder that a triple killer was still at large, and the police could not predict where he would strike next. Behind the scenes, intelligence teams worked around the clock, tracing Clifford's digital footprint, checking phone records, bank transactions, and CCTV footage from nearby towns. Every scrap of information mattered: a blurry figure on a bus camera, a tip from a passerby, a car spotted near woodland. Officers were even deployed to hospitals and clinics in case Clifford sought medical attention for injuries sustained during the attack. The search was relentless, consuming every available resource. This was not just a local hunt. Neighboring police forces joined in, and soon the manhunt became a national operation, with Clifford's name echoing through every corner of the UK. The scale of the operation was unlike anything residents of Hertfordshire had ever witnessed. Helicopters circled overhead well into the night, their searchlights sweeping across dark fields. Armed officers patrolled parks and wooded trails, their rifles ready. Police dogs barked as they were led into dense undergrowth, searching for any trace of the fugitive. In one tense moment, reports of a possible sighting sent dozens of officers racing toward a quiet residential street, only to discover it was a false alarm. Each lead brought both hope and anxiety, as officers balanced the urgency of capture with the fear that Clifford might lash out again before being cornered. The public watched the drama unfold in real time, refreshing news feeds and listening to updates as the search grew wider and more intense. Social media buzzed with rumors, unconfirmed sightings, and messages of fear and solidarity. For many, the thought of an ex-soldier with a deadly weapon wandering the countryside was terrifying. For the police, it was a nightmare scenario, a suspect who was not only ruthless but also elusive, blending into the very landscape they were searching. And yet, despite the scale of the operation, Clifford managed to stay one step ahead, vanishing each time the authorities closed in. The manhunt was no longer just about finding him, it had become a race against time, with an entire nation watching and waiting to see how it would end, after nearly 24 hours of fear, uncertainty, and relentless searching. The manhunt for Kyle Clifford reached its dramatic conclusion. Police had followed lead after lead, chasing sightings across Hertfordshire and North London, until finally, the net began to close in. Intelligence reports suggested Clifford had fled into the Enfield area, where vast stretches of woodland and abandoned buildings offered the perfect hiding place for someone with military training. For hours, armed response teams and tactical units swept through the dense terrain, moving cautiously, knowing full well that Clifford was believed to still be carrying a deadly crossbow. Every movement, every rustle of leaves, could have been him waiting to strike. The tension among officers was palpable. This wasn't just an ordinary arrest, this was an operation against a trained and unpredictable suspect who had already killed 3 people in cold blood. Tactical teams moved with precision, using drones and helicopters to scan the ground, while search dogs picked up on faint trails. Finally, in a secluded area near a cemetery, officers spotted a figure that matched Clifford's description. The atmosphere turned electric, the fugitive they had hunted for hours was right in front of them. Officers surrounded the area, cutting off every possible escape route, and with weapons raised, they closed in. Witnesses in nearby houses recalled hearing shouts, commands from officers demanding Clifford's surrender. The standoff was brief but tense, as police feared he might make one last violent move. But Clifford, exhausted and cornered, did not resist with the same brutality that had marked his crime. Reports later confirmed he had sustained injuries, though it was unclear whether from the attack itself or his desperate attempt to evade capture in the wild. Paramedics rushed to the scene, treating him on the spot before escorting him under heavy guard into an ambulance. Forensic officers quickly secured the area, searching for the crossbow and any other evidence that could link him to the murders. News of his capture spread like wildfire across Britain. Breaking news bulletins interrupted television programs, headlines flashed across phone screens, and the words everyone had been waiting for finally appeared: Kyle Clifford in custody. Relief swept through communities that had lived in fear for hours. Parents who had kept their children indoors finally exhaled, and neighbors who had barely slept could now rest, knowing the man responsible for such unspeakable violence had been caught. Outside the victim's home, where flowers and candles continued to pile up, mourners shed tears of relief, not because their loved ones had been returned, but because justice was finally within reach. For detectives, Clifford's capture was both a victory and a turning point. The first stage of their mission, finding the killer, was complete. But the next stage, uncovering the motive and securing justice in court, had only just begun. Who was Kyle Clifford, and what had driven him to slaughter 3 women with a weapon as brutal as a crossbow? Those were the questions investigators, and indeed the entire nation, now demanded answers to. His arrest marked the end of the manhunt, but the beginning of the most crucial chapter, ensuring that the voices of the victims would be heard, and that their killer would face the full weight of the law. When news first broke of the triple murders, the public knew only that 3 women had been killed in a Hertfordshire home. But as the hours passed, the true weight of the tragedy was revealed. The victims were not anonymous faces, they were members of the same family, a mother and her 2 daughters, women who had once shared laughter, love, and an unbreakable bond, only to have their lives stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. Their names quickly became known to the world, and with them came a wave of grief that spread far beyond their community. The mother, a woman described by friends as compassionate and kind, had dedicated her life to her family. Her daughters, young women with dreams, ambitions, and futures still unwritten, were said to be full of energy, promise, and warmth. Together, they represented everything good about family life, love, unity, and hope, and that made their loss all the more devastating. The story took an even more heartbreaking turn when it was revealed that the victims were the wife and 2 daughters of BBC racing commentator John Hunt, a familiar voice to millions across the United Kingdom. For years, John Hunt had been part of the daily lives of racing fans, his commentary filling homes, radios, and televisions. To discover that this respected and beloved broadcaster had lost his entire immediate family in a single night was a gut-wrenching shock. Colleagues described him as the kindest of men, and the thought of him being left utterly alone, stripped of the people he loved most, struck at the heart of the nation. Suddenly, this was not just another true crime story. It was a personal tragedy that resonated with millions, a reminder of how fragile and cruel life can be. Tributes poured in from all corners of the country. Outside the family's home, the pavement transformed into a sea of flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Strangers wept openly as they left messages of support, while friends and neighbors spoke of a family that had touched lives with their warmth and generosity. The BBC itself issued a statement of shock and sorrow, with Hunt's colleagues rallying around him in an attempt to provide strength in his darkest hour. Social media overflowed with messages of condolence, with thousands expressing outrage at the senselessness of the crime and offering support to a man who had been dealt an unimaginable blow. The identities of the victims brought the horror into sharper focus. These were not nameless statistics, not faceless entries in a police report. They were a mother and daughters who should have been safe in their home, whose lives should have continued to unfold with birthdays, celebrations, and everyday joys. Their futures, weddings, careers, children, milestones, had been ripped away in seconds, leaving only questions and grief. For John Hunt, the loss was not only personal but total. In a single night, he went from being a husband and father to standing alone, forced to carry on in a world where the people who gave his life meaning were gone. As the tributes grew, so too did the anger. People across the UK demanded to know how and why this had happened. What could have driven Kyle Clifford to carry out such cruelty against a family who, by all accounts, had done nothing but live peacefully? The victims' identities transformed the narrative from one of horror to one of heartbreak. They were no longer just victims of a brutal crime, they were real women with names, lives, and legacies that deserved to be remembered. And as their stories were told, it became painfully clear that this case was not just about murder, it was about the destruction of love, family, and innocence at the hands of a man who had chosen violence over humanity. The capture of Kyle Clifford may have ended the manhunt, but it was only the beginning of the long road toward justice. Across Britain, the public followed every development with a mixture of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. The brutality of the murders, the use of a crossbow, the intimate setting of a family home, and the deliberate targeting of a mother and her two daughters, left people shaken to their core. For days, news bulletins led with the story, newspapers filled their front pages with the victims' photographs, and broadcasters debated the deeper questions this case raised. How could such a crime happen in modern Britain? How could one man inflict such devastation with a weapon so archaic, yet so deadly? And most importantly, how could the justice system ensure that this horror would never be repeated? Public outrage intensified as details emerged about Clifford's background and his connection to the victims. Many demanded to know whether warning signs had been missed, whether someone with military training and access to weapons should have been more closely monitored. Calls for tighter crossbow regulations quickly gained momentum. Members of Parliament debated whether ownership of such weapons should be restricted or even banned, pointing out that while firearms are tightly controlled in the UK, crossbows remain relatively unregulated despite their lethal potential. The triple murder transformed what had once been a fringe debate into a matter of urgent national concern. For the families grieving their loved ones, the discussion came too late, but for the wider public, it became a rallying cry. No one wanted to see another tragedy like this ever again. Meanwhile, the legal process began to unfold. Clifford was placed under arrest, escorted under heavy guard, and brought before magistrates in a case that was followed closely by the media. His first court appearance drew a crowd of reporters and members of the public, eager to catch a glimpse of the man accused of destroying an entire family. Every detail of the hearing was scrutinized, his demeanor, his words, his silence. Prosecutors laid out the charges in stark detail, 3 counts of murder, while the defense remained tight-lipped, preparing for a long and difficult trial. Legal experts predicted that the case would be one of the most closely watched in years, not only because of its brutality but also because of its implications for weapon laws and domestic violence awareness. For John Hunt, the surviving husband and father, the proceedings were a grim reminder of his unimaginable loss. Colleagues at the BBC described how he continued to be overwhelmed with messages of support, yet no amount of public sympathy could ease the pain of sitting in court, forced to listen to the details of how his wife and daughters were killed. Each mention of their names, each piece of evidence presented, was a fresh wound. But he remained steadfast, determined to see justice carried out on their behalf. His grief became a symbol of resilience, inspiring thousands who admired his strength in the face of such devastating tragedy. The wider public's reaction was twofold: grief and solidarity on one side, anger and demand for justice on the other. Candlelight vigils were held in Hertfordshire, with communities coming together to honor the lives of the victims. Social media campaigns spread messages of remembrance, with hashtags carrying the names of the women who had been lost. But alongside this mourning came fury. People wanted accountability. They wanted answers. They wanted assurance that Clifford would face the full weight of the law and that no loophole would allow such a crime to be repeated. As the legal wheels turned, Britain watched closely, united in sorrow and in a shared demand for justice. The murders of 3 innocent women had not only devastated a family but had forced a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about violence, regulation, and the fragility of life. And though the courtroom would eventually deliver a verdict, the memory of this crime, and the public's reaction to it, would echo for years to come, a haunting reminder of a night when love and family were shattered by a single man's choice to kill,